Now let's graph y equals secant, and we realize that this is the same as 1 over cosine of x. So what we're going to first do is we're going to start by graphing. Let's graph y equals cosine x. We'll mark our key numbers here. Whenever you're graphing, you're going to always label 5 key points. Pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. And then we'll go, for right now, in the opposite direction. Since you know the basic shape of the cosine graph and the sine graph, all we need to do is get a few points down there, and then we'll be fine. So the cosine of 0 is 1. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of pi is negative 1. 3 pi cosine is 0. And then cosine of 2 pi is 1 again. Cosine of negative pi over 2 is 0. Cosine of negative pi is negative 1. Now note here, what's happening is always going to happen. It's going to be the same. We go high, mid, low, mid, high. Let's sketch it with a dotted curve, because our focus here is not the cosine, it's secant. Now let's use this to figure out the secant graph. Now what are our key values here? Well, we're looking at the reciprocal. 1 over 1 is 1. So all of these points where it's 1 are going to be the same, and 1 over negative 1 is negative 1, and those are going to be the same. What's 1 over 0? 1 over 0 is undefined. So what we're going to do is have an asymptote here. So all these 0 values, let's put an asymptote down. And that's going to help us to, these questions here are key values. Where are these? This is pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 2, etc. What's the difference between each one of those? It is, we can start with the pi over 2. If we add pi, we get this next one. If we add pi again, we'll get 5 pi over 2. So it's pi over 2 plus pi n. Now we have the reciprocal 1 over 1. Where does it equal 1? It's going to be at 0, at 2 pi, at negative 2 pi. These values will be at 0 plus 2 pi n. Where will it be negative 1? It'll be at negative pi, pi, 3 pi, 5 pi. So that will be pi plus 2 pi n. We keep on going one full turn around the circle. And let's hold off on the 0 part. Now, 1 over 1 is 1. Let's just pick some random numbers in here where it's a half. Okay, what's 1 over a half? That would be up here at 2. What's happening to these values here? They're getting smaller. 1 over a fourth, what's that going to be? 4. I'm not doing this to scale. 1 over 10 will shoot up to 10. What's 1 over 100? You go up to 100. So what's happening to these values here? They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. What's the difference between this side? Well, there is none. These are positive values. 1 over a half is still going to be 2. 1 over a fourth is still going to be 4. 1 over 10 is still going to be 10. And so it looks something like that. Similarly, we now have between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2, what's the difference? These are all negatives. So if we have negative 1/2, the reciprocal will be negative 2. So they're getting smaller. And then once we have this basic shape, we can, all these sections will look basically alike. Now, some people like to think of this as parabolas. Are they parabolas? No, they're not really parabolas because they have these asymptotes, and parabolas don't have asymptotes. All right. You can also do, if I did cosecant, you would start off with the sine graph, and then it would look very similar. Where does secant equal 0? Where does this solid graph touch the x-axis? Never. At no place can you find the reciprocal and have it equal 0. All right, the next one. Tangent equals negative 3/4. We're going to set up an xy axis. We're told that we're between pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So here's pi over 2, and then we'll go to 3 pi over 2, so we don't want any of this section. Where is tangent negative? In the second or the third quadrant? Well, it's going to be in the second quadrant because sine's positive and cosine's negative. Now, we need to determine, we have this negative here. Where does the negative go? Does it go with the 3 or does it go with the 4? Well, since this vertical value here is positive, that 3 has to be positive. The x value here is negative. The 4 has to go with, the negative has to go with the 4. Use the Pythagorean theorem. You already know this is 5. So now we can say the sine of theta equals 3 over 5. The cosine of theta equals negative 4 over 5. So the key thing here is you need to be careful about that negative. Look what quadrant you're in, and you have to give the negative to the appropriate number.